David Lobser. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I had something similar recently. I reconnected with a friend from elementary school when I was going back to Denver for COVID, and I was calling him by the name I knew him in elementary school, and it had changed, and it took him a while to correct me.
Yeah, yeah, I know. But especially these days, it's like you need to. You're supposed to get it right. And I mean, this is coming from a guy who sort of adopted the name Krishna. So I think there's a lot of people out. I'm not one to talk, but it's good to see you. It's good to see you, and we've crossed paths, you know, for many many years. Just to give people some background, you've done a lot of different video and VR things in the East Forest world. Everything from the Spores. If some people don't know, the entire Spores album has a video VR component that is living as a playlist on YouTube. That's pretty amazing and detailed and high definition. And you did some even things like way back, we did an event in New York. What was it called? It was at Lightbox on the west side, and we called it Urban Ceremony. And you and Daniel Baker were kind of heading up their 360 projection, and it's a rectangular room, so it's not a dome, but the projection is mapped everywhere. And we did all sorts of fun things, like I put on a one of those Muse brainwave headsets and used that data to affect the visuals in the room as I was performing, which I thought was super fun. We've always wanted to do that where the audience was had wearables, but that was one way of doing it. We just put a wearable on me. Um, and you've done videos like for Please Pass the Bliss on the Ram Dass album, and other things. So, and way back we met through a community, our community in New York, and you were doing some VR stuff, back when it was less mainstream. So, am I missing anything? And just kind of catching people up to speed.
Yeah, I'd actually completely forgotten about that Lightbox event. That was pretty amazing. Yeah, it's like a lot of people have done interesting things with EEGs. We can talk a little bit more about that. I think there was one. I also did a video for Highway One that was a
Oh yeah, way back. Yep.
an interactive web-based one. And yeah, I've just I've been really inspired by your music for a long time. I mean that introduction we had, what was that, 10 years ago or something,
At
um,
least, yeah.
in New York. That was kind of my introduction to a whole new world in it, and it's like that event really changed my life and kind of my trajectory of my career. So I've been, always very happy with all of our collaborations. Please Pass the Bliss is probably one of my favorite music videos. Um,
Yeah, it's how would you describe it? It's sort of crystalline and geometric, but at the same time fractal without being traditionally fractal, maybe?
yeah, it came out of a project where I was doing some experimentation with basically creating a kind of virtual volumetric display. So the idea was to kind of break space up into something called a honeycomb, which is like if you take different kinds of geometric shapes and smush them together, you can basically fill space. So I used a tetrahedral, octahedral honeycomb. And then the
Whoa.
idea was that these math functions would essentially grow these triangles out to fill space a bit. So that whole video is basically made of two interlocking toruses that are affecting these, like another layer of interlocking elements of this honeycomb. So kind of under the hood, it's kind of fun in a nerdy way. It's not like really obvious that that's exactly
That is
what's going
nerdy.
on.
Yeah, that is like you lost me on a lot of those things. I mean, anytime I hear toroidal, I think of Nissim Haramain. And but basically there's a lot of math going on there, playing with shape. The effect is quite beautiful. But let's kind of step back here for a second, and in virtual reality, which is something from my perspective that's been talked about for a long time. I even think about Timothy Leary and how big he got into that in the latter stages of his life when it was really nascent form of technology. Do you still consider it to be a early form of what it could be? And why have we been talking about this so long? And it's sort of like people who are into cryptocurrency. They're like evangelical about it. People who are into VR are just like, this is going to change the world. And I think from the outside, I'm looking in thinking like, well, when? Or like, why? It doesn't seem to be adopting in a mainstream way. And it's cool. It's super cool. But as far as like being this sort of influential thing for culture and art, what do you think? Will it get there? Is it not there? And why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we were around in the 90s for the first boom in VR. I don't know how, or that actually wasn't even the first boom, but sort of the first, like, really sort of mainstream
It was talked about a
boom. And,
lot.
like, sort of like,
Yeah.
culturally, it's like, VR was huge in the 90s. That, it's like early 90s was the first time that I tried VR. And it's like, The Matrix and Lawnmower Man. Actually just met Brett Leonard, the director of Lawnmower Man, last week. uh, and there's just like an explosion of interest, and part of that is just this idea of having an art medium that is so completely immersive, like the idea that you're not just creating music or sculpture or something to look at or something that exists in the world, but you're creating the entire world, is something that's just really inspiring to a lot of creators and consumers and just people who are into this idea that whatever you can imagine, you can put people completely inside of it. So I think that there's just something that's really inherently exciting about the possibility of the medium, and a lot of people try it and they're excited by the medium, but not so much excited by the content that exists now. So I think that's kind of where we're at. The hardware is getting to be pretty good. It's still a bit clunky. You still have to go out of your way to get the headset strapped on, and you have to register your space, and you have to deal with like all kinds of hardware issues. So it's still
Well, yeah. I mean, is that kind of been, do you think, the main barrier in that? Like, because if we're basically talking about a visual medium, the technology of it being compelling has to be good enough that it's just that compelling. And perhaps certainly in the 90s, it must have been extremely basic. And I know I've seen some stuff actually quite recently that was really cool, but it still feels like, yeah, I'm in this digital world that looks less detailed than, say, a CGI movie. And not that I expect it to be like that, but it certainly doesn't look like reality. It's a different kind of space because of its limitations and what it can do with pixels and processing. And what do you think about that?
I mean, because of the requirements of the hardware, we're still in a place where we are, we need to create things that are on the level of video games. So it's not like being in reality; it's more like being in video games. I think that there was some hype with with this last iteration of, this explosion of VR, where people were betting on the idea that it was going to replace cell phones, or that it was going to be this new technology that was going to be so widely adopted that people were going to be just using it every day for everything in the same way that people are using cell phones now. And that's turned out to not be the case for a lot of reasons. In part, you're socially isolating yourself, and people are pretty self-conscious about that. It's like you can use your cell phone wherever you are, but you can't whip out a VR headset and put it on like instantly. you know People are going to be looking at you if you're in public and you can't see them. So there's like instantly kind of this, social distancing effect that happens. So it's kind of made for being in specific places at specific times. And it's not so much something that is quite ready to be interwoven into our daily lives. So I think
Well,
that's part of. Uh-huh.
even Google Glass basically failed because people were freaked out by a very minor amount of tech and how people thought, oh my God, people could be filming me at any moment. And that's like AR. And even that was too much for folks at the time. Whereas with a cell phone, I guess it's more like surreptitious whether or not you're filming someone or not. Yet we all know we have that ability to do at any moment. But something about how, like, when I'm looking you in the eye, that also has a way to record, or there's some sort of technological barrier or advancement. Like you're some kind of cyborg, and I don't have that tech, and it didn't
Yeah.
work. And even things like the Segway, remember the Segway? And people were like, "That's going to revolutionize the world. Every mailman will be on one, and every person. Cars are going to go away." And no, Now it's more of a joke for tourists on tours of uh, yeah. So it's the exuberance for some of these technologies. But I think what we think about with VR is like the idea it takes you to a different place, and it can be anything. And I want to segue a bit because I need to learn about this metaverse stuff. From my understanding, Facebook is just trying to like change their name to appear cooler and better and less evil. But at the same time, this is in a VR space. I know they're investing heavily in this and almost giving away headsets or at cost. This seems like if they're doing that, not good. But correct me if I'm wrong. Like, what is their angle here, and how does that relate to VR in a positive or negative way, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, it's kind of playing into this dystopian narrative that is just part and parcel of VR as a medium, because in a way it's this amazing thing where we can share our imaginations with people, but it's also this terrible thing that could potentially isolate us from the real world and immerse us in this completely fake space that's completely controlled by corporations. And that's basically their plan is
Oh
to
my God,
sort of have this technology that's like, beyond just the accelerometer that's in your phone and your geolocation. You can get a lot of information from people's phones, but when you put a headset on, you know where they're looking, like how their head's moving. You can detect heart rate and breathing, and like really, you can get a lot of information about
data!
people's
It's a lot of
bodies.
data.
It's a lot
Yeah.
of data. So yeah, basically, Facebook is required to be on other people's platforms. They're on Google, they're on iPhones. They're not in control of that hardware. So their play and their idea with VR is they want to be the ones to actually own the operating system and own the hardware and be totally vertically integrated, so they don't have to rely on other people's hardware decisions. Like right now, if Apple wants to block Facebook from gathering some kind of data, or force allow users to opt out of data that Facebook is collecting, they can do that. If they have their own hardware, then they can do whatever they want. So it's kind of a mixed bag, because on the one hand, their products are pretty amazing. Like they brought on John Carmack from Doom fame, who is like really the brains behind this explosion of VR. He's a genius. And their hardware is amazing. Like the Oculus is just the best thing out there. So on the one hand, we're getting this amazing piece of hardware, and they're really pushing the technology, which is great because I'm a big fan of the medium. At the same time, the trade-off is still kind of unknown. Like, what's going to come out of that? Are they going to be the only owners of the space, because they don't really have competition, on a certain level, like with these mobile standalone headsets and with completely integrated social worlds online. Like they're the only ones who are interested in or able to make investments in that space. So, like a lot of stuff with VR and a lot of stuff with technology and a lot of stuff with any storytelling mediums at all, like since the birth of the written word, it's a mixed bag, right?
It's a well, it sounds like it's less of a mixed bag. Like it's actually they have too much power and influence that how could anyone compete? And they're even steering like the best technology of it and controlling that. And it does seem like, do you think that could like kill it before it's even born in a sense? Like the promise of the medium that you're excited by, I'm sure is nothing to do with corporations getting more data and so forth. I'm sure you're excited about the creative potentialities or the way that because of its immersiveness on all those different levels and the way you're getting all that data, you could make experiences that are really transformative for people. We've talked about way how you're doing ceremony, the way you can, if you can manipulate all the light and the sound, and it's dynamically responding to someone's emotional response and their heart rate and their breathing, you can really shift their consciousness in ways they might desire to have an altered state of consciousness. And this is just something you could probably do with this kind of tech. So I would imagine you're excited by that, but it does seem like, I mean, it's even just the bad branding of like if like, well, Facebook is getting into VR, this can't be good. It's an uphill
Um,
battle.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single person in the world that is excited about the fact that Facebook is, you know, gunning to own the space. so
Yeah,
I
right.
think the best outcome from this would be that other players realize that there's a market and that there's an interest and that there will be more competition. I mean, the downside with these devices in general is that, unlike music where you can just sell somebody a guitar or you can sell somebody a chisel to make a sculpture, it's like more than other mediums. It is uh, a medium that kind of requires, you know, corporate influence. It's like these companies need to be able to make money by selling these really sophisticated devices that, are using uh, this like collection of sensors and cutting edge software and all of this stuff. So there's kind of much more of an investment on that end of things than with other tech. So I think, whoever's in the lead on that front is always going to, be in a position of being able to be a little evil. And, that's going to be, in 100 years, that's going to be some other company. It won't be Facebook. I don't think VR is going to go
God
away.
help us. Yeah, if it is.
I mean, I think it's pretty questionable whether people are going to like really want to engage with VR in the same way that they engage with their phones. I think we're quite a ways away from that. It's still, like a fairly small percent of the population that's going to want to join the metaverse at all. So I think in terms of it being as societally transformational as Facebook is right now, where they can manipulate people's emotions and change elections just by changing people's news feeds, I think we're a long way away from that. And the thing kind of, partially to get back to our previous topic, it's like, I think that where VR is not heading is this thing where everybody is sitting around in VR using it all the time as a utility, but it's going to be a thing that's going to be really useful for specific cases. You go to a festival, or you want to attend Burning Man, but in VR, or you're going to the dentist and you want to get distracted from your pain, so you put on a VR headset, or you want to do, prep for some psychedelic medicinal experience, but you don't have a person to create a real space for you because you're at a hospital. So I think that there are a lot of really interesting specific use cases for the headsets where it doesn't actually matter who's really in charge because ultimately they're just making this device and we can hack into it. It's like we can get around Facebook, we can upload our own software and treat the thing like a device. So I think that that's a bit different than whatever is going to be
Mm.
happening with the broader societal implications of people spending all their time in VR and turning into Wally or wherever we might be going with that.
Right. I suppose who knows where it could go in decades from now, but in the near term, there could be a green argument to like if it was compelling enough in the VR space that it's almost like you could go places that you wouldn't have to get on a plane for, whether that's travel, tourism, or even like concerts. And that's sort of the underbelly of getting together. I mean, the great thing about going to a concert really is the shared experience. There's an energy to it, and not to mention the sound can be so much bigger and really touch your body in ways that it probably won't at home. Those big subwoofers and so forth. So I don't know if it would work or not, but it could be interesting if it did, where through VR you're going to like a ceremony concert of mine, and everyone's from different places. They didn't have to leave their home, but the visual element, the auditory element, whether or not they're wearing like a sub pack or something so they can feel the sound, they really feel like they're there. Or almost like what you're seeing is truly like there's cameras in the space, like 360 cameras all over. So it's the actual imagery, and it's so HD that it's like I just feel like I'm right there. Or you want to go to Italy and see Venice, there's probes floating around, and you just pay a nominal amount to go to Venice for the night and sit at a restaurant. I don't know how they do the food thing. DoorDash brings you some really awesome Italian food, and you and your partner have a dinner in Venice. Uh, so I could see that, and there's an element of like we can't keep hopping around on planes and so forth. But do you think you could get there like that? They somehow that the energy of an experience could be transmuted through VR.
I think that the most important part of what you're talking about is that human to human connection, and uh, and that's a hard part, right? Because there's so much information that we communicate to each other when we're in person. It's like facial expressions, body language, how close you stand to people. There's just like lots of details that get communicated. And the Zoom call that we're on, it's uh, it's limiting, right? And in VR, it's interesting because there's different kinds of communication that can happen as a VR avatar. And in some ways, it's better. In some ways, it's more limiting, right? It's kind of if you're in VR as a cartoon version of yourself, it's actually freeing in some ways. And, you kind of are almost puppeteering yourself in kind of an interesting way. So I think that,
Mm,
the parts of group VR experiences that are going to make, what you're talking about feasible and interesting for people are, can we get to the point where we're getting closer and closer to being able to express as much as we can express to each other in person via this
right.
technology? And we're definitely
Well,
not there yet. And that's where like a lot of work has to happen.
the porn industry will figure this out for us. I mean, they're the advancement of all this technology before, and they'll do it again because they have an incentive to figure it out. The tactile sensations, smells, everything. Um, but let's let's pivot from that to how this works, because you've done some interesting work in the medicine space with, is this a useful tool, particularly in ketamine sessions? But I suppose this could be translated into other forms of psychedelic therapy as those come online in legal therapeutic formats. So it seems like you've been working on using a VR headset that people put on. And for those who haven't tried it, a lot of the headsets now are wireless, uh, and that's nice. But you still have this thing on your head, and it kind of blocks all your vision, so you just see a full screen, so to speak, all the way everywhere you look. It's just you're looking around a room, and the sound would be on headphones or it's built into the headset. So essentially, you've got the sound element as well. And sometimes you have these little controllers, so you can sort of select things like you're touching something in a space, in essence, to press buttons or whatever. So you contend that you're making a VR visual experience, an auditory experience for people to use to kind of guide them through a ketamine journey. And have you found that people want this or not? Because I know for myself on medicine, any kind of screen like my phone or something, I can't even I physically can't quite see it. And it sort of has this energy of like, oh my God, I have to turn that off or put that down because I just want to close my eyes and go into the inner landscape. But what have you found?
I completely agree with you when it comes to any significant amount of psilocybin. Definitely the last thing I want to be doing is looking at a screen. It's like a dark room with a candle and really good music is the thing for that. I think ketamine's different. I mean, I don't know why exactly, but just subjectively, it's like screens actually have more depth and
Mm.
are even more interesting to look at. In VR, in particular, um, it's like supercharged in a way. You're even more there in the space.
Ah,
So subjectively, I kind of started doing this via the route of making algorithmic procedural art. So the idea is kind of screensaver graphics, basically, like Winamp style stuff from the 90s, where there's just like pretty stuff that you just kind of want to, be entranced by. So I was just kind of doing that for
shout out
myself.
to Electric Sheep, by the way, if people are looking for some good screensavers.
Oh yeah, Scott Draves is amazing. He is actually working at Facebook on some of their
No shit.
some of their AR tech right now. So yeah, he's a genius and basically designed a new kind of like a unique kind of algorithm for generating kinds of fractal graphics that nobody had used before, and built this whole system where you could download his screensaver and it would play these videos, and you could kind of interact with this community to develop the seeds for these
Yeah.
procedural graphics. And it's like he was way ahead of his time, and was just doing amazing work. This is all like 20 years ago. So it's, yeah, the kind of work that I started doing I was an animator first. Like I didn't like I've only actually been programming for about 6 years.
Mm.
So, part of this process was figuring out what I think is interesting and beautiful via these new tools that I was learning. So yeah, it's definitely in the realm of electric sheep, like Winamp. Um, what was the one with the flying toasters? Electric,
That's way back, man.
which
I
one
don't know
was
what that's
that?
called, but
After
I remember
Dark. It was
that.
called After Dark. Yeah, they
Oh
had
yeah,
like that used to be a thing. It's like people would pay $40 for a collection of screensavers, and I don't know why that's not a thing anymore because they're
because
pretty
it's
great.
not. It's just electric toasters flying across your screen. I
But
mean,
yeah,
we
it's like
expect so much more now. It's
well, I mean,
crazy.
there is this whole. I mean, I don't know how many of them are around anymore, but there was a push to basically develop screens that you would hang on your wall, and they were just there basically to display art. So not that different than showing screensavers. So I'm not sure why that connection isn't there. I don't know. I don't have screensavers either on my own computer, but
I have I
yeah.
have I have electric sheep, which comes on after a long time. But I love that one because you can also hit certain keys on your keyboard, and it's got those three elements. You can change different things on it and
Hmm.
kind of play with it, like you're saying. And it's open source, so it's always changing too. People add to it,
Yeah.
which I like. Anyway, so in the ketamine space, you think it's sort of medicine specific, which I guess makes sense. Uh, I just haven't really tried anything in ketamine therapy beyond the internal landscape, as it were. And I haven't. I just never thought of it. I never had the experience. I mean, we've tested around yours when you were playing around with it, but I mostly was just experience it not on that medicine.
Yeah, and that's how most people get to have that experience. And it was definitely a question early on if it was the kind of thing that people were going to be into, because it's like sometimes I find out that things that I like are things that other people like, and sometimes I find out that my taste is off the wall. So I was introduced to a clinic in Manhattan run by Dr. Tim Canty. It's called Manhattan Restorative Health Sciences, and they're very forward looking and wanted to basically experiment with this space. So I took some of the work that I had done previously, added some new work, and put it together into a collection. The idea being that I don't necessarily know what people are going to like the most. So it was a
Mm.
collection at first of about 8 different VR experiences that people could have, all very passive, all designed so that people wouldn't have to interact with anything while they're like pretty high on,
Yeah.
on ketamine. And we found that the initial survey was done with about 20 people, and most of them, like 3/4 of them, preferred the infusion experience with virtual reality.
Oh.
So it's
Okay. Right on.
yeah, so people like not everybody likes it, and it's not for everybody. Some people just find the experience to be disorienting in a way that they don't like, but a lot of people do, and I think that kind of as a medium, in a way, it's at least for myself, it's like I think like large scale studies will have to get done to like really prove it out, but based on the work that I've done and this initial study, I'm totally convinced that that can be a really good pairing. And I think that part of the power of it is not everybody can go to an East Forest ceremony, and not everybody is going to have the most amazing setting for their experience. Like this clinic that I've been working with, it's a clinic. Like the walls are gray. They have devices on the wall that are pinging. It's like stuff like that. So it's like a way for people to have some taste of the kind of thing that you offer as well.
Is this? I want to ask you if people where people can like check this out now, but especially for people who are novices to VR. But have you heard of something called Topia or Top? I think it's Topia. Someone made a virtual space. I mean, it's web based for the Spores album that just sort of out of the blue. These two artists in Italy, I believe, and just I think it's up now. We've been trying to figure out like how to share it in a wider way, but you drop into it, and it's sort of this beautiful illustrated landscape that you can walk around and meet other people, and each sort of like zones for each song for the album. So it's sort of a way to experience the album. And I thought something like that would be really cool on VR, where not only is it maybe dynamic, but it could be dynamic just by how you choose to walk through it. And you're experiencing the music, but with other people and in space. So, is the thing you're talking about visitations, or how can people like kind of try this stuff out with or without a headset, or like to walk people through, like they're like, I don't know, this sounds interesting to me. I want to experience it. How can they?
Yeah, maybe also actually I just signed into Topia just to check this out. So maybe I'll just like say one thing about that, and that is, a lot of people were thinking that maybe the pandemic would be, potentially really good for VR, and I think that it's kind of a mixed bag. But there was, I think that a thing that came up a bunch, and I've been to a few different spaces that are kind of like this, but even more than VR, I think that there's was a mini explosion in people creating just like web-based kind of shared virtual experiences that are not like VR but just screen-based, where you can see other
Yeah,
people as avatars, like kind of like Second Life. And I had some friends who had started that before the pandemic, and it kind of exploded after the pandemic. So I think that like aside from the actual medium of VR, there is something about kind of having a spatial relationship in a world with other people that people are interested in. So
if you're logged on, try topia.io/spores and see if that still is up. I think that was the. I
yeah,
apologize
yeah,
to
I'm in there
the.
right now and I'm wandering around. It's super cute. Yeah, yeah, it looks cool.
Yeah,
So
so
if you logged in as well, like
well, we're busy right now, but I could, yeah, I could log in there and say hi to you, but you're right here. So it's gonna screw up my computer, I think, if I start
yeah.
loading spaces and audio but yeah. So say it again. Like, if is there any way people? I've heard if you want a headset, you can get them. How? And they're almost subsidized. I mean, I hate. It seems like the Oculus one is the one to get, even because Facebook sort of like wants you to get it. But are you locked into some kind of Facebook universe, or what? What does that mean?
I mean, you have to sign in with your Facebook account. Uh, So there's that, and that's enough of a turnoff for most people. If you're kind of okay with that, I mean, my attitude toward Facebook is I have it, but I don't really use it except for kind of the bare minimum of like you know like
You
basically
use them; they don't use
professional
you.
uses.
Yeah.
It's like
You
I
screw up
mean,
their algorithms by putting you liking weird things that you don't actually like.
yeah,
You
something
know.
like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, basically, if you're okay with Facebook, you can get a Quest, and it's about $300. And if they were actually charging what it really cost them, I mean, it would be minimally $800 or $900. So you are getting like a pretty sophisticated piece of tech for a pretty big discount. And the trade-off is Facebook knows what you're doing with it. Um, so
Mm.
that's one way to get the get Visitations as an app, but it actually works on any PC-based headset. So if you have a Vive or an Index or like an HP headset, a Windows mixed reality headset, there's just like a ton of devices that you can just plug directly into your PC, and then you don't have to tell Facebook anything about what you're doing.
What about the Google Cardboard thing that you just slot your phone and it's like a headset made of cardboard, so it's like super inexpensive VR? Does that just not work very well?
I actually have a version of Visitations that works as a cardboard app, and I think it's actually pretty good. Like the resolution of my phone is actually a little bit better than the resolution of some of these headsets. So I've actually, yeah, I've tried that, and it's nice. The thing is, it's not a thing anymore. Google stopped
Oh,
supporting their own Daydream headset, and it's except for a few special cases, in like the world of VR, it's just not a thing that people do anymore. So I have a
right.
version of
Yeah.
that. If people want to reach out, I can give you that special build. But yeah, that's just not so much of a thing. There is one company called Space VR that is making VR for flotation tanks, and they basically wanted to make a custom waterproof headset. And they're, as far as I know, like the only company that's sort of invested
I
in
think they
mobile VR.
reached out to me to do music because weren't they? Are they the ones that are into the overview effect? The idea if we can get people out into space, it'll help. Which I agree that if we could all get out into space, I have this intuitive feeling that we'd all kind of be like shake us into our sanity and be like, wait a minute, there's one planet and this is amazing. Oh my gosh, look at the whole cosmos around me. But it's not very practical to get everyone into space for obvious reasons. So I think their idea was like induce the overview effect in a uh, float tank, and music was a big part of that.
Yeah, and I mean the overview effect and a sense of awe are actually really important and fundamental parts of healing journeys via art. Like that is something that can be produced with visuals and music.
Mm.
I guess sort of I mean, the way that they're doing that is to actually use video footage from the space station, so kind of like publicly accessible, like video. So you're basically like literally looking at video of the Earth, and I guess where I come from in the space is a little bit more from the perspective of being an illustrator and a designer. So
Mm.
my thought is, if you want to create an overview effect of the Earth, or if you want to create a sense of awe, kind of how do you transform reality in a way while making the best use of the medium to create that effect, rather than just kind of showing the picture. So it's like kind of the way that I'm looking at it is, how can I create the vacation rather than showing the vacation video, basically, which
Yeah, I get that. It's a little more artistic too and interpretive, but perhaps broader in that way. It's a richer experience because it's like you said, it's could be more. Um, so if
but it
people,
kind of
where do people though? Going back to visitations in this product, is it like just on a website or is it in a particular store? Because I'm kind of a novice. Like, is it? How do people like actually see the thing that you did? We've talked about the tech itself, like how you would view it.
yeah, you can go to my website, visitationsvr.com, and there's links to the different stores. So it's available sort of on the Quest side store. So you kind of have to, go to a specific link to get it for the Oculus
Right. Okay.
Quest. And then there's links there to get it via Steam and one or two other places as well. And if anybody wants to reach out, to you, I can provide codes for the app as well. So it's normally $10, but anybody who's interested, I don't know, I don't want to like put you out there, but if people contact me uh, via this podcast, I can give them copies of the app as well.
All right. Well, that's very generous of you. Well, is there anything else that you're particularly excited about or working on or concerned about that you want to touch on in this universe or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I just wanted to say about the idea of approaching the creation of these visuals in a somewhat more illustrated way is that there are some visual techniques that can actually, directly affect people's physiology. So that's something that's really interesting about the medium of VR is the medium on its own, the fact that it isolates you from your body and it's, completely enveloping, like it has effects that actually are analgesic on its own. Like they'll
Mm.
reduce pain to some extent, just as a medium, it'll just do that. So there are some other techniques we can use, like binaural beats, which, may or may not do some entrainment of brainwaves, but definitely have some subjective effects. There's also things we can do like strobing lights. So if you strobe lights at different frequencies, you can certainly have an effect on people's brains. You know, one way that we know that it has an effect on people's brains is that if you're epileptic, you'll have a seizure if you're looking at lights that are strobed too much. So that is actually a warning that I have on visitations is, if you have epilepsy, be careful because there are some scenes that strobe quite a bit. I also make use of spirals and symmetry and kinds of things that are, people have been making use of since the dawn of visual art, where it's just like, we respond to mandalas, like the way that our eyes work and the things that we're attracted to in nature. It's like healthy mates like are symmetrical is, kind of like one aspect of this. And, we find more symmetrical faces more attractive and stuff like that. So there's kind of things that we are programmed to find attractive and easy on the eyes and that can affect our brains in a certain way. And that's something that I'm very interested in exploring with this medium, is the idea that, there are some specific techniques and kinds of visual imagery that we can use to get people where we want them to go a little bit more quickly.
It is cool how certain imagery pushes us into the internal landscape. And I'm interested in that from a sonic point of view. But it is true. Like these mandala like shapes and the way you're moving into it and through it and it's blossoming and expanding induces a kind of sense of moving inside. And I'm sure there's more than just the feeling of that. There's sort of a physiological response, which is really cool. And I would highly encourage people to go check out, particularly the Spores album that you put together. There's a whole playlist on YouTube that sort of is the whole thing. So you can, it's like the, can't remember how it's titled, but something like the VR experience of Spores. But it's on East Forest Music on YouTube. I'll make a point to link to it in the show notes too. But I think it's a great experience. It's a way of kind of combining not just the auditory but the visual at the same time in a very intentional way. And I hope people can check it out because it's out there. It's been out there, and I want people to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing collaborating with you, and I'm so happy that your music is in there, and people get to have that experience together. Of getting a lot of great feedback with that, and hoping we can keep working together in the future.
Cool, man. Well, good catching up. Good to see you're still doing your thing, and I look forward to chatting another time soon. Have a good one.
Cool, awesome, thanks, buddy.